The sun clawed its way above the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson. Dust swirled in the still air, settling on the weathered porch of the old ranch house. Cade stood silently, broad-shouldered against the dawn, his eyes scanning the vast expanse of the land that was now his. Beside him, Lila, pale and small, knelt in the dirt, fingers tracing the outline of a forgotten flower. Her silence hung heavy between them, a fragile thread woven into the fabric of their lives. Days of hard labor had forged an unspoken bond, yet shadows lingered in her gaze, as if she carried a weight too great for her slight frame. With each passing minute, the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the ground. Lila looked up, a flicker of something, fear or perhaps longing, flickering in her dark eyes. Then, in a breath, she was gone, swallowed by the world beyond. The crisp dawn light filtered through the worn wooden slats of the barn, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air like restless spirits. Lila stood there, her small frame hunched against the chill of the morning. The scent of hay mixed with the earthy musk of livestock filled her lungs, yet all she could taste was the bitterness of betrayal. Her brother had promised to protect her, to shield her from the world's cruelty, but with each slurred word he had uttered that fateful night, the weight of his drunken incapacity shattered any remnants of loyalty she had. She was nothing more than a commodity to him now, a price tag in an ugly game of desperation. The memories were sharp, slicing through her thoughts like the edge of a blade, a few gold coins exchanged for her future. Cade had arrived at the ranch just as the sun broke free from the horizon. He was half native, a blend of two worlds, yet completely unwelcome in both. The ranch was his father's legacy, a sprawling expanse of life and decay, where dreams floated and withered beneath the unforgiving sun. When he first laid eyes on Lila, it was as if the earth had shifted beneath his feet. This pale girl, standing in stark contrast to the warm browns and greens of the landscape, was not just a girl. She embodied everything he'd lost to the relentless march of time. For a moment, the weight of his own isolation evaporated, replaced by a rush of instinctive protectiveness. Her wide emerald eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and there was a haunting familiarity in the way she clutched her threadbare dress. He approached cautiously, gauging the distance between them. Cade wondered how anyone could sell a child like this, how sorrow could be so easily bartered. Lila's gaze met his, and in that instant a connection sparked, a thread of shared pain that neither of them had asked for. He saw the remnants of hope flicker behind her frightened exterior, yet that light was fleeting, fading as quickly as it flared. They were both prisoners of their circumstances, woven together by a chain of heartache that seemed indestructible. He offered her a timid smile, one that carried the weight of his unspoken promise to protect her, but Lila's lips remained pressed into a thin line, her world too complex for simple gestures to breach. Lila had learned to keep her heart guarded, a necessary armor forged from years of neglect. Even now, standing in the shade of the barn, with the morning sun gilding the chaos around them, the ache within her clung tightly. She had glimpsed kindness before, but it always bore the bitter sting of abandonment. The thought of trust felt foreign, a language spoken in hushed tones at the edges of a fractured home. As Cade shifted his weight, his boots crunching softly on the gravel, she took an involuntary step back, instinctively retreating into herself. The walls she had built rose high, solid and unyielding. She had learned that attachment could lead to nothing but pain, and the scars of her brother's betrayal were freshly burned into her memory. Cade watched her closely, feeling the weight of her emotional distance like a stone pressing against his chest. The barn was filled with the sounds of awakening life, yet here, in this moment, silence hung thick between them, binding their fates in ways they couldn't yet understand. He felt a surge of anger rise within him, not at her, but at the world that had brought them both to this point. The injustice of her situation stirred something deep within him, an enigmatic blend of tenderness and rage, and he yearned to draw her out of her shell, to show her that not everything in life was steeped in betrayal. But he was an outsider, and she was lost, each of them adrift in their own seas of grief. With the sun now fully risen, its rays spilled into the barn, illuminating the motes of dust like stars scattered across an infinite void. But the light fell short of reaching Lila's guarded heart. Past experiences hung heavy in the air, weaving a tapestry of mistrust that made any thought of closeness feel like a delicate dance on a precipice. Lila turned away, casting her gaze to the ground, tracing the grain of the weathered floorboards, feeling the warmth beneath her fingertips, but unable to draw strength from it. She didn't want to be sold, didn't want to matter to anyone anymore. The ache of longing for a safe harbor was swallowed by the louder cry of survival, and she steeled herself against the pang of vulnerability that threatened to rise. Cade's heart sank further as he sensed her retreat, the way she folded in on herself, barricading her soul with walls built from an arsenal of hurt. He knew he couldn't rush her, couldn't break the barriers she had erected with mere words or gestures. Instead, he focused on being patient, honoring the silence that surrounded them. A bond forged in shared trauma was fragile, and any effort to shatter her defenses would only deepen the chasm. He felt the emotional distance widen, the space between them echoing with loss, but he also felt a flicker of determination ignite within him, an unyielding desire to help her heal, to carve out even a small nook of trust in her heart. As the world outside the barn awakened with the sounds of a new day, Lila remained cloaked in shadows within herself. She was not ready to reach for hope, to trust in the unfamiliar notion of kindness. The morning light had broken, yet her heart remained locked in the darkness she had grown accustomed to, a place where love had been turned to ash and safety had become a distant dream. And in that moment, as the sun climbed higher into the vast sky, Lila felt the weight of her solitude envelop her, wrapping her in a familiar chill, an ache that for now felt insurmountable. Through the sprawling expanse of dry grass and scattered sagebrush, Lila stepped onto the threshold of the ranch, where the sun hung low, casting a golden hue across the landscape. Her heart raced, an erratic rhythm in the stillness that enveloped her. She clutched the faded strap of her backpack tightly, a new weight in her chest that was neither excitement nor dread, but a tether to the past she had left behind. Ahead of her stood a weather-beaten barn, its wooden beams sagging like the tired shoulders of an old man. The ranch was alive in subtle ways. The creak of the door as it swung open, the distant rustle of wind, and the faint scent of hay mingling with something earthy and raw. Cade emerged from the barn, his silhouette stark against the vibrant sky, framed by the muted colors of the ranch. He was a figure of quiet strength, his features rugged and worn, telling stories that Lila was not yet privy to. As he approached, she felt a strange tug in her gut, a mix of fear and an inexplicable longing for acceptance. He offered a slight nod, an acknowledgement of her arrival, but his eyes were guarded, reflecting the weight of his world that often felt too heavy for someone so young. Lila could sense his hesitation, a silent barrier, as if he grappled with the presence of a ghost from another life. The first few days unfolded under the thick blanket of silence. Lila found herself alone more often than not, the vastness of the ranch echoing her isolation. Each morning, she would rise before dawn, the soft light creeping through the cracks in her room, illuminating shadows that seemed to dance with the day's possibilities. But the possibilities never materialized. Instead, she spent her hours tending to the animals, the routine of feeding and cleaning providing her a sense of purpose, though Cade rarely joined her. He would leave at daybreak, his silhouette merging with the horizon, returning only after the sun had sunk below the hills, his face etched with fatigue and something unspoken. Once, she caught him watching her from the barn's entrance, his arms crossed, a study in stillness. She turned quickly, feeling the heat of a blush creeping up her neck, unsure of what to make of the way he observed the world around him. There was a softness behind his stoic demeanor that intrigued her. She longed to break through the wall he had built, yet each attempt felt like flinging herself against rock. She had come to this place hoping for some semblance of home, but the ranch felt like a cage, each corner a reminder of her solitude. As the days stretched into weeks, Lila's presence began to carve pathways in the rigid routines of ranch life. When she would watch the shadows stretch long against the barn in the late afternoon, she could see Cade's work ethic reflected in her own. A connection sparked, born from the shared burdens of labor, and Lila found solace in the repetition of their tasks. She began to whisper stories to the animal she cared for, a balm for her lonely heart. In her solitude, they became her confidants, and the ranch transformed into a canvas where she projected her dreams, each stroke fraught with hope and longing. One night, as shadows cloaked the ranch, Lila sat on the porch steps, the cool air brushing against her cheeks. She felt the heaviness of the night wrap around her like a blanket, and for the first time, she dared to let her thoughts wander to Cade. The outline of him working against the moonlit landscape had ignited a flicker of curiosity within her. What lay behind the fortress of his silence? The thought of breaking through compelled her, but fear delivered a swift kick of hesitation. She held her breath, contemplating how to unravel the threads of fabric that held them apart. As dawn broke, painting the sky in gentle tones of pink and orange, Lila stood at the edge of the property, her heart fluttering with a strange urgency. She couldn't shake the feeling that the dawn was a signal, a promise of something. She watched the sun rise, light spilling over the earth, illuminating the contours of the ranch she was slowly beginning to call home. But there was something eerie in the quiet, the kind of stillness that felt heavy with foreboding. She turned, her eyes searching for Cade, but the familiar sight of him was absent. A gnawing unease settled in her stomach, and with it came a creeping realization that perhaps the quietude of their existence was a harbinger of change. Lila stepped back from the edge of the property, instinctively treading back toward the ranch, a coil of anxiety tightening in her chest. As she traversed the worn path, each step resonated with the weight of uncertainty, shadows stretching behind her in the pale light. She felt an unseen force pulling her deeper into the confines of the ranch, as if the land itself was claiming her, entangling her in its disquiet. The thought of being swallowed whole was disconcerting. The ranch held secrets, and Lila was yet to uncover them. The sun rising too quickly against her fears, she pushed herself to quicken her pace, driven by an inexplicable urge to find Cade, to understand the veil of silence that lingered between them. But as she stepped onto the porch, the unmistakable stillness returned, wrapping around her like a shroud. The sun clawed its way above the horizon, casting a wash of orange light over the sprawling ranch. Lila's breath fogged in the crisp morning air as she pushed open the paddock gate, the rusted hinges creaking like old bones. She would start her day, the same as always, making her way toward the corral where the horses were already restless with anticipation. Each morning felt like a whisper from the past, echoing faintly through the vivid colors of the present. Yet, despite the routine, Lila still felt like a ghost in this vast land, shadows hanging on her every move. Cade emerged from the small cabin, his silhouette framed against the rising sun. He ran a hand through his tousled hair, the strands catching the light. Lila watched him from the corner of her eye. There was a ruggedness about him that fascinated her. He was half-native, an enigma wrapped in layers of rugged charm, but there was something deeper in his eyes, an unquenchable thirst for understanding. Each glance he sent her way stirred an ember of curiosity inside her chest, igniting thoughts she dared not voice. "Morning," Cade said, his voice a low rumble as he approached her. Lila offered a hesitant smile, her heart racing. Those mornings were punctuated by their small exchanges, the mundane mingling with something charged, something unspoken. She could feel the distance between them, the borders of their pasts wrapping around their interactions like thick vines, choking any potential for intimacy. Yet that morning, when Cade reached for the first horse, his fingers brushed against hers, and the shock of it sent a ripple through her, awakening something she thought had long slumbered. As they trained the horses, the sun climbed higher, spilling warmth across the ranch. Lila's hands worked deftly, but her mind danced with thoughts of her life before this place. Her father's slurred words, the empty promises of better days. Each moment spent with Cade beckoned her further from the shadows of that past, yet she couldn't shake the fear that loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. When Cade turned to her, asking if she had ridden before, she hesitated, thinking back to the way her father had pushed her onto a pony once, the bruises from that day still fading. "Just a bit," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, hoping he wouldn't sense the tremor beneath it. Cade's brow furrowed as he noticed the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. The weight of his own history pressed on him too, the pain of loss, the scars of abandonment. He had grown up navigating the choppy waters of identity and belonging, feeling out of place, whether among the native community or the ranching world. Lila's wariness mirrored his own fears, drawing an invisible line between them that felt impossible to cross. Just as he was about to probe her deeper, the sound of a distant train broke the moment, scattering their fragile connection like leaves before a gust of wind. The days passed, each one a tapestry woven from moments of silence and shared laughter. Lila began to learn the rhythms of ranch life, her fingers growing calloused yet strong. The horses responded to her touch in ways that felt almost magical. She could sense their anxieties, their hunger, their spirit. Cade watched her with a mix of admiration and confusion, unable to decipher the flickers of joy and sorrow that danced across her features. Was it his presence that unsettled her so, or was she just a vessel, carrying the weight of all the pain from her past? One evening, as the sun dipped low, drenching the land in golden light, Lila finally summoned the courage to voice her fears. "Do you ever think about what you left behind?" she asked, her eyes searching Cade's face. He stilled, the breeze catching the loose strands of hair that framed her face. In that moment, he saw a flicker of vulnerability. His heart cracked open just enough to let his own fears spill forth. "Every damn day," he confessed, the weight of his words hanging heavy between them. Their truths hovered in the air, a raw intimacy forming without them even realizing it. Her gaze dropped to the ground, the gravity of their shared histories palpable. "I sometimes feel like I don't belong anywhere," Lila admitted softly, a tear escaping down her cheek. Cade stepped closer, an instinctive move fueled by a need to bridge the chasm between them. "You belong here," he murmured, the sincerity of his words wrapping around her like a balm. That promise lingered in the air, but beneath it lay an undertow of doubt and insecurity, a reminder that the world outside these borders still loomed ominously. But as the stars winked into existence, Lila's heart continued to race, bound by a tether of hope and fear. Within the confines of the ranch, she had found a sliver of freedom, but the shadows of her past were never far behind, whispering that the night would eventually swallow her whole. And as the final light of day gave way to darkness, she couldn't shake the feeling that just as she was stepping into the light, something was poised to pull her back into the shadows. The morning sun poured over the ranch like liquid gold, illuminating the fields that stretched into infinity, and yet the warmth failed to touch the frost that had settled on Lila's heart. She stood by the old wooden fence, its rough surface biting into her palm. Cade was nearby, tending to the horses, his presence a sinkhole of warmth in a world that felt cold and hollow. Her gaze flickered to him, the way he moved with a quiet confidence, his hands deftly managing the reins. But something gnawed at the edges of her mind. Cade had given her the gift of a new life, pulling her away from the chaos of her past. Yet now she felt lost within the silence that stretched between them. It was as if he had planted a garden with rich soil, but Lila wandered through it, unsure of how to bloom. She wanted to express her gratitude, to unleash the torrent of emotions that swirled inside her, but every time she opened her mouth, the words twisted into knots and fell into the void. "Mornin', Lila," Cade called, breaking the silence, drawing her out of her reverie. His voice was warm, yet it sliced through the stillness, leaving a strange tension in its wake. Lila turned to him, a smile that felt foreign on her lips. He saw through her facade. She could feel it, the way his eyes narrowed slightly, assessing, waiting for her to speak. But she remained silent, the weight of their unspoken truths heavy like a shroud. "Do you ever miss it?" Lila asked, surprising herself with the question. The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered. She barely recognized her own voice, a mix of curiosity and longing. Cade paused, the brush he held hovering in mid-air. "Miss what?" The question hung thick in the air, charged with meaning. "Your home," Lila replied, her throat tightening. "The land, your family, everything." Cade's expression shifted, shadows flickering across his features like the clouds that passed overhead. "Home's a tricky word," he said slowly, as if each syllable required careful consideration. "I've got the ranch now, but it's different." Lila sensed an aching sorrow behind his words, an unhealed wound festering beneath the surface. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap that had grown between them, but vulnerability felt like a foreign language that she hadn't yet learned to speak. Her heart raced as she watched him struggle. "What about you?" he asked, his gaze piercing. "Do you miss what you had?" The frankness of his inquiry struck her like a sudden gust of wind, overwhelming and grounding all at once. Memories of her former life flickered before her eyes, a drunken father, the darkened corners of their home, the loneliness that had clung to her like a second skin. "I miss the idea of it," she admitted softly, surprised to find the honesty spilling forth. "I miss feeling safe." Cade stepped closer, the space between them tightening as he searched her face, and in that moment, a flicker of something raw and tender passed between them. "You're safe now," he said, though his tone hinted at uncertainty. Lila wanted to believe him, to cling to the anchor of his words, but shadows of doubt danced in her mind. She had come from a place where safety was a mirage, a fleeting whisper in the dark, and now she feared the vulnerability of opening up, of allowing someone into the fragile shell she had built around herself. "Do you really think so?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. As soon as the question left her lips, she regretted it. It felt too much, too exposed. She braced herself for his response in her heart, a quiet turmoil simmering just below the surface. The silence stretched like a taut wire, and she could see him grappling. For a moment, she feared he would retreat behind the walls he had built, but instead, Cade reached out, his fingers brushing against her arm, grounding and electrifying all at once. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said, a fierce sincerity in his eyes. His touch sent a tremor through her, breaking the dam that held all her fears at bay. For the first time, Lila felt the warmth of a connection that went beyond gratitude, a fragile thread, weaving them together amidst the chaos of their pasts. The dawn exploded into colors above them, but within Lila's heart there was a dawning realization. In that moment of vulnerability, she understood that to be safe meant being seen, and perhaps, just perhaps, Cade might be the one to help her find her way home. Not to a place, but to herself. The first light of dawn spilled across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of muted orange and gold. Lila stood at the edge of the corral, her pale face illuminated by the soft glow of morning. The chill of the night lingered in the air, frost clinging to her breath as it escaped her lips in little ghostly puffs. She stared into the expanse of grazing land, the unending stretch of grass swaying lightly in the wind, longing for something she couldn't yet name. Cade approached, his footsteps crunching softly on the gravel as he neared her. He had woken before sunrise, a restless night spent pondering the weight of her presence at the ranch. She was a delicate figure, caught in a world filled with rough edges, each day marking the resilience he admired, but also the fragility he feared. As he came closer, he caught the scent of her, a faint trace of lavender mixed with the earthy aroma of the land beneath them. "Did you sleep well?" Cade asked, his voice a low murmur, almost drowned out by the soft rustling of leaves. Lila turned to him, her eyes reflecting the dawn's light, shimmering with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. It was a simple question, but it held the weight of his concern, the way he was learning every contour of her being, each quirk of her expression, mapping an invisible bond between them. "Not really," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the movement revealing a hint of vulnerability. Cade took a step closer, drawn in by the uncertainty in her gaze, the way she seemed to balance on the precipice of fear and trust. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between them, but something held him back. The ghosts of her past lingered like shadows in the corners of her eyes, memories stitched into the fabric of her being. As the sun crested the hills, golden rays igniting the world around them, Cade knelt beside her, his hands resting on his thighs. He pointed across the fields where wildflowers were beginning to bloom, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the muted earth. "Do you see those?" he asked, drawing her attention to the patch of bright yellow and violet. "They thrive without much care. They find a way to grow no matter what." Lila followed his gaze, the colors igniting something within her, a flicker of understanding. "Like us," she said softly, her eyes darting back to his face. The way she said it made Cade's breath hitch, a silent acknowledgement that their lives had intertwined in unexpected ways. They were both survivors, fighting against the harsh climate of their realities, seeking solace in the shared space of the ranch, in the quiet moments that felt electric with possibility. A breeze swept through them, whispering secrets of change and hope. Cade reached out tentatively, brushing his fingers against the back of her hand. It was brief, almost fleeting, but the connection felt seismic, a crack in the armor that had shielded them both. Lila shivered, not from the chill of the morning, but from the spark that ignited between them. She met his gaze, and in that moment the world around them faded. Nothing existed except for the two of them and the unspoken words that hung thick in the air. Cade withdrew his hand, a mixture of longing and hesitation etched across his face. "I know things have been hard for you," he said, his voice steady despite the fluttering chaos in his heart. "But this place, this ranch, it's more than what it seems. You can be more than what you've been told." Lila nodded, but her eyes clouded with uncertainty. The remnants of her past still clung to her like a shadow, whispering doubts and fears that battled against Cade's hopeful words. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating their surroundings in a warm embrace, Lila took a deep breath, tasting the promise of freedom on the air. There was a bond forming, delicate yet strong, the kind that could flourish amidst adversity. With her heart racing, she allowed herself one small step closer, the space between them closing just enough to breathe in the possibility of a future where she didn't have to vanish at sunrise. Lila sat on the edge of her bed, the morning light slicing through the cracks in the wooden walls, illuminating the dust motes that danced lazily in the air. Her heart raced, a steady thrum that echoed the familiar restlessness in her soul. Cade had left for the fields, his silhouette fading into the horizon, leaving behind the lingering scent of horses and sweat. With each passing moment, the walls of the small room felt like they were closing in on her, and the silence weighed heavily on her mind. She ached to speak the words that swirled in her heart, but doubt constricted her throat like a vice. The memories of the night before flooded her, the warmth of Cade's hands on her shoulders, his gentle voice coaxing her to share her thoughts. She had wanted to, so desperately, but every time she opened her mouth, a suffocating wave of fear crashed over her, freezing her tongue in place. A part of her longed for his understanding, for his kindness to wrap around her like a protective shield. But another part feared the vulnerability that came with speaking out loud. Would he see her as broken? Would he turn away if she revealed the chaos of her past? Lila pressed her palms against her knees, feeling the rough fabric of her worn jeans beneath her fingertips. There was a fire within her, a yearning to claim her voice and stake her existence in this world. She thought of the dreams she had buried, of dancing under the stars, of singing without fear. What if she told Cade about the nights spent in silence, listening to her father's drunken rants instead of the lullabies of her childhood? What if she unleashed the storm of emotions that had been bottled up for so long? The thought terrified her, yet it also ignited an ember of hope that flickered in the shadows. With each deep breath, Lila felt the weight of her uncertainty begin to lift, giving way to an unexpected determination. The sun rose higher, casting a golden glow that drenched the room in warmth. She stood up, shaking off the inertia that had gripped her all morning. There was something sacred about the connection she had with Cade, a bond that transcended her reluctance to share. She envisioned him as a steady anchor, grounding her as she navigated the tumultuous waters of her past. Could she trust him enough to share her truth? Stepping towards the small mirror in the corner, Lila studied her reflection. The pale girl with haunted eyes stared back at her, and for the first time, she didn't shy away. She took a moment to gather her thoughts, imagining the words she longed to say spilling out, unrestrained. She pictured Cade leaning against the doorframe, his eyes warm and encouraging. She could feel the rise of emotion threatening to break free, and she was prepared to let it flow. As she moved towards the door, Lila was struck by a wave of anxiety. What if Cade didn't understand? What if her voice shattered the fragile peace they had built? The thought of rejection clawed at her insides, but she took one more step forward, willing to embrace the discomfort. The world outside her door was vast and waiting, brimming with possibility, and she was tired of hiding in the shadows. She wanted to belong in this world, to carve out a space that was unequivocally hers. Lila pushed the door open, the creak echoing down the hallway like a siren call. She paused briefly, letting the cool air rush against her skin, filling her lungs with the scent of the earth and the promise of morning. Her heart raced with anticipation as she stepped into the sunlight, feeling the warmth wrap around her like an embrace. Each moment was a reminder that she wasn't just a ghost of her past. She was alive, standing on the threshold of change. She found Cade in the barn, his hands busy with the reins of a horse, the muscles in his arms flexing with every movement. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, her courage wavering like a flickering flame. But then she saw the way he turned toward her, his attention shifting, his expression laced with curiosity and concern. The sight of him reignited her resolve, and she took a deep breath, ready to face the storm of words that had long been trapped inside her. "Cade," she said, her voice trembling but strong, the sound echoing her determination. He looked up, the warmth of his gaze settling on her, and in that moment, all her fears melted away. The daylight poured through the barn doors, illuminating the space between them. It was a moment suspended in time, filled with potential and promise. She was no longer just a pale girl lost in the shadows. She was ready to be heard. The dawn broke softly over the hills, casting a golden hue across the expanse of the ranch. Lila sat on the porch, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug filled with cold coffee. The air was thick with the scent of earth waking up, but her heart felt heavy with silence, a silence that had taken root since the night Cade had ridden off into the shadows without a word. She watched as the first rays of sunlight sliced through the trees, illuminating the path he had taken, and a shiver ran down her spine. The emptiness of the land seemed to echo back to her, amplifying the void inside. With each passing minute, the chill of the morning seeped deeper into her bones, but it was not the cold that made her shiver. It was the weight of unspoken feelings. Feelings that had been brewing like a storm inside her since that fateful day Cade had first walked into her life. He had been her savior, the first flicker of warmth in her existence, and yet the pain of his sudden departure twisted her heart into knots. She couldn't help but wonder if he had known she needed him more than ever now, more than she had ever let on. Cade, she whispered into the stillness, the name slipping through her lips like a prayer. In the quiet of the ranch, where the wind rustled through the grass and the birds began their morning chorus, it felt significant, as if saying it finally set the energy of her world into motion. Lila squeezed her eyes shut, allowing memories of him to wash over her, the way he had smiled, the kindness in his gaze, the way he had fiercely protected her from the chaos of her past. Each recollection felt like a tender caress, yet the absence of his presence left a raw ache in her chest. The sun continued to climb higher, yet Lila felt frozen in time. She could picture him beside her, the warmth of his shoulder brushing against hers as they watched the world wake up together. She remembered laughing at the way he'd try to imitate the crows cawing from the trees, their attempts at humor breaking through the barriers of her guarded heart. Cade had shown her a world where laughter and light coexisted, where joy could reclaim what had once felt lost. How had things turned so cold, so dark in his absence? Then, as if drawn by an unseen force, she rose from the porch and stepped onto the dirt path leading into the heart of the ranch. Each stride was deliberate, a rebellion against the weight of despair. She followed the trail that twisted toward the stables where Cade had often spent his days, his hands working tirelessly with the horses, a quiet strength emanating from him that had always captivated her. What she wouldn't give to feel that strength now, to hold on to him like a lifeline as the waves of grief threatened to drown her. "Cade!" she called out, her voice breaking the stillness, desperate and raw. It echoed into the emptiness, swallowed by the vastness of the land. The sound felt foreign to her ears, a reflection of all the unexpressed emotions that had built up within her, the fear, the longing, the love she had kept bottled up like a secret too precious to share. "Cade, come back!" The words rang out as a plea, a summoning of the spirit that had once brought color into her dreary existence. As her voice reverberated through the air, Lila was surprised by the tears that streamed down her cheeks. They fell freely, unrestrained, cleansing her soul. In that moment of vulnerability, she understood that she was fighting against the shadows that clung to her like a second skin. She wanted him to know that she was still here, that despite the darkness that had momentarily engulfed her, she was alive and aching for his presence. And just then, as if the universe had heard her call, a sound broke through the silence. The thundering of hooves, the rustling of leaves, and the unmistakable silhouette of a rider emerging from the horizon. Time slowed as her heart raced, each beat echoing in her ears as she recognized the familiar figure on horseback. It was Cade. Relief and hope collided within her, igniting a spark that had long lain dormant. She stood rooted in place, unable to believe that he had returned, that he had heard her. As he drew near, the world around her faded away, leaving only the two of them suspended in this moment. Dust swirled around him like a halo, and all that remained was the resonant truth. "Cade," she breathed once more, this time louder, more powerful, filled with everything she had wanted to say. She stepped forward, surrendering to the tide of emotions that swept through her. The ranch around them pulsed with life, but here, with Cade, she rediscovered her own, alive, vulnerable, and utterly free. The sun began its ascent, casting a golden hue over the rugged expanse of the ranch. Lila stood at the edge of the field, her silhouette framed by the rising light, the weight of dawn heavy in the air. Cade approached, his footsteps muted on the dewy grass, the chasm of their shared silence echoing the unspoken understanding between them. He reached for her hand, fingers brushing against her palm, a gentle question without words. In that moment, the world held its breath. The distant mountains embraced the sky, shadows weaving tales of longing and loss. Lila's gaze was drawn to the horizon, where the sun kissed the earth, a promise of rebirth. Cade's thumb traced the back of her hand, each stroke a vow to protect the fragile heart he had come to cherish. As the light bathed them in warmth, Lila closed her eyes, allowing the whispers of the wind to carry her fears away. She felt the tether of her past loosening, the ghost of her father fading with the night. In the soft rustle of leaves, she found a quiet strength. Together, they stood on the precipice of a new dawn, united by the silence that spoke louder than any word.